Welcome to your daily dose of theological German. We are on installment number 7 here on hermeneutics of the Torah. So I just have yesterday's sentence up here in blue. Today's sentence is the one in black, and we're just going to need to look quickly at something to get some context. It says here, the historical place, or you might want to say context, and then you have this demonstrative or relative pronoun. It's genitive, so you want to say something like of which or of this or whose. And so you need something to fill that in, and that actually comes from yesterday. The procedure or method of the exegesis of older texts is what's being picked up by that pronoun. And so really what the author is about to talk about here is this procedure or method that's being used within an ancient historical context, not his own method or something like that. He's talking about the method of scribes that were working on these texts. And so that's kind of what he's referring to, and so you just want to keep that in mind as you pick that up and put it into this pronoun. That's the idea, some kind of method of exegeting older texts that scribes are using. And that's what is in here in dessen. So let's go ahead and translate the rest of this sentence for today. So this sentence is fairly straightforward because you do have your subject in first position and your verb in second position. So as we said, the historical context of the practice of exegeting older texts. Werden is going to be a past tense of the verb sein, and so you're going to say was the schools of the scribes, or scribal schools, or something like that. So the next clause here begins in which, and so this is another relative pronoun, and it's picking up on the schools of the scribes, scribal schools, and as such, it's a subordinate clause that is modifying that noun. With subordinate clauses, your verb is generally going to be found at the end of the subordinate clause, and so you want to go down there and find it. And in this case, you'll see that it is the verb werden. Of course, it is past tense. And with the verb werden, you have a few different possibilities. This could be a future construction, in which case you would need an infinitive to complement it within the clause. It could be a passive construction, in which case you would need a participle. It could also be the only verb in the clause, in which case you would translate it with something like become. But in this case, you do see this participle here because you have the ge prefix, gelesen, is a participle, and so you know this is going to be a passive construction. The thing about these passives, though, is that they often occur in subordinate clauses, and so your werden verb gets pushed to the end. It's a little easier to spot that it's going to be passive when the werden verb is actually up front in second position. But when it's at the end, you don't necessarily realize it because you're just reading along in the clause, and the first thing you get to is a participle. And so if that's the way you're reading, and you're not jumping to the end to find the verb, if you get to a participle before you get to any other verb, you should anticipate very often that you're going to have a werden verb somewhere down at the end to turn that into a passive. So let's go ahead and finish this one. So in which older, don't miss the comparative morpheme here, in which older texts were read, including, this is a preposition, unter, which takes a da component on the front and sort of changes the meaning from under to mean something like including. Including also such, and this here is an adjective, such what? Such texts. You have to kind of supply, and so you might even just use a kind of relative pronoun there, including also those texts, such texts, which, this is a relative pronoun in German, which in the framework of a canonization or canonizing process or something like that, so to speak, this is part of what makes this author a little bit tricky to deal with, is that he throws in a lot of these very colorful modifiers and discourse markers. Gleichsam means something like so to speak. So he's kind of going to start hedging here. And that's actually important to know because as soon as he says so to speak, you know he's now starting to describe things that are potential ways of thinking about something, but aren't hard and fast in a total sense. And that's very important because the verb at the end of this clause, erhalten, you'll see here, this is a form of the verb erhalten, which means to receive or something like that. But that morphology is very, I guess you could say, uncommon. And in fact, you might end up having to sort of go find a full verb table for this verb, or at least for the verb halten, in order to make sense of this. But I'll just tell you so that you know, that is a imperfect subjunctive. And so you don't need to do too much in terms of translation about the subjunctive part of it because it's already kind of baked into the way we phrase things in English, so to speak. But that's why it's subjunctive, is because it's a so to speak idea, not some hard and fast thing that the author's trying to say. But because it's imperfect, you're going to want to translate it probably in English with some sort of past tense or perfect tense or something to let you know that it's in the past. So you're going to want to say something like, including also those texts which were or did or had received normative, let's highlight that, normative meaning in a process of, or in a framework of canonization. Okay. And then the final clause in this sentence. And here you have another subjunctive verb. This is the subjunctive form of the sein verb, actually. It also could be imperative, so you have to look at that and go, well, am I suddenly commanding somebody to be something? Probably not. And actually here you have a subject as well. So you're going to want to say, and it might be, that's where you're going to pick up the subjunctive sense, and it might be that it, to the canon of let's see, the literature of the school, so this being the scribal school that we were seeing previously, so that it to the canon of the literature of the school belonged. And so what he's saying is it might be that the texts that were written as an exegesis of an older text could come to belong to the canon of the school of literature to which the activity was taking place. So let's go ahead and just translate the whole sentence now and try to see if we can have it be smooth, because I think I may have lost some of the full sense in all of my ramblings about it. So the historical place or context of this process of exegeting older text was or were scribal schools, in which older texts were read, including also such texts which had received a normative meaning in a framework of canonization, so to speak. And it might be that they belonged to the canon of the school's literature.